Sur la lancée de l'exposé, l'excellent exposé.
Taking up from Pierre Jacquemot's excellent presentation, I would like to start by pointing out that Congo-Kinshasa is not exclusively a Great Lake country, although it is surrounded by Lake Albert, Lake Mero, Lake Kivu, Lake Edward, and Lake Tanganyika, which is the case for no other country in the region. Congolese prefer to state that they are in Central Africa because it's a bigger geographical concept, because the country is surrounded by lakes and also by other neighbors. However, you can object that it is Mobutu Zaire who set up the economic community of the Great Lakes countries in 1976, to pick up from where Belgium left off. But the initiative was only taken after an aborted attempt to set up a union of Central African states in 1968, whose ambition was to bring French Equatorial Africa together with the Belgian Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi. Congo was reluctant to identify as a member of the Great Lakes, and that is mostly due to the fact that it has become involved in the fighting in Burundi and Rwanda, and the attempt to portray it as a major player in the region. So there was a step that was too easily taken. But what is often forgotten is that the Congolese are a people which is very diverse from its cultures. The cultures as started by the colonial powers. The workforce was completed by people from the whole of Africa, Western Africa, and also Rhodesians, Rwandans, Burundis, and from Congo, Brazzaville. So the Congolese have a long tradition of welcoming and integrated newcomers, including refugees from the post-colonial era. But let us recall the geographical and historical fundamentals. Here is the map of the present Congo, to pick up on the excellent maps we've already seen. That is Kivu with its 26 provinces. So Kivu is the entry point for the Great Lakes area, the eastern area of Africa is quite singular by its history and by the way it was shaped. That is the Great Lakes area. That is the region with the highest population density of the continent. Some demographers mention a demographic time bomb. There are 400 inhabitants per square meter per square kilometer, in Rwanda. Kivu is the least populated area, but that province, which was created in 1933, and it was divided in 1984 in southern Kivu, North Kivu, and Maniema. You have that on the map. So those three autonomous provinces make up the most populated area in Congo. In 2010, the density north Kivu was assessed at 103 inhabitants per square kilometer. In southern Kivu, South Kivu, 79.2, 6.5 in Bandunu, 5.2 in the eastern area, 4.7 in Equator, and even less in Katanga province. But if we can see the next map, demography, you see the eastern area of the Congo. But since ancient times, there's been a sort of internal rebalancing on each side of the Graben by populations moving from the east to the west. There is a historical saturation in some areas. There was also a colonial saturation because the Belgians were granted Rwanda and Burundi by the League of Nations. They used to be German possessions, and they used them they used the population to plant tea and coffee plantations and also for minerals in Katanga. In 1935, there was a policy of transplanting immigrants and settling them to escape the periodic famines in Rwanda. That is why an immigration mission was set up at that time. At that time, the reduction of available space got more and more pressing because of the setting up of the Albert Park in 1925, the Viringo Park. They were extended in 1929, in 1935, and then another natural park was set up later on. But right up to the end of the colonial period, in spite of the migratory waves, there was a type of balance that was struck. And you see that through the history of colonization. Belgium had to decolonize very fast, and it did not feel it was able to place immigrants and refugees in its priorities. And the good neighborhood relations in the old Belgian colonies meant that in 1959, delegations from Rwanda and Burundi took part in various congresses organized by Patrice Lumumba in Kisangani, notably. And alongside the roundtables in Brussels, Lumumba published a communique. Here is an extract. The MNC, the Congolese National Movement, became aware of the manifesto published by the students in Rwanda and Burundi, where they claim independence for their own country at the same date as Congo. And their wish for Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi to become a federation. The MNC supports the legitimate demand of the Rwandese people to dispose of itself, and we support it fraternally. So perfect friendship. But the merging of political fighting did not lead to independence at the same time for Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi. On the ground, a new crisis started to appear at the time of decolonization. There was an acceleration of migratory flows from Rwanda and Burundi. There was a dominant position that started to be claimed by immigrants. In Rwanda, as you all know, there were events in November 1959 which gave rise to the abolition of the feudal reign. And the future president of the Republic inaugurated or started the massive exile of Tutsis towards or into Congo and Burundi. The counterattacks organized in 1961 and then 1963 only reinforced that movements towards exile in the Congo and in other neighboring countries. The defenestration of the Kayibanda by Habyarimana in 1968 only changed somewhat the movement of Tutsis into exile. Some of the Rwandese nationals occupied higher positions. For example, the head of the transport of Mobutu, who played the role of vice president of the Republic. He set up a regime which was in favor of Rwandese-speaking nationals. All Rwandese people living in Congo got the nationality, and several of them were appointed to head national companies, state companies. In North Kivu, Masisi and Rutshuru changed owners because immigrants were more numerous than the local population. In South Kivu, there was a strong Hutu population coming from Burundi, notably after the failed coup attempt in 1969, which gave rise to massive executions in the population in Burundi. There was a counterattack in 1972 as a revenge for the victims of 1969 through the elimination of the Tutsi elites, which gave rise to massacres and Hutus. Thus were massacred in turn. Those massacres from 1969 and 1972 gave rise to thousands of victims and thousands of refugees fleeing to other countries, neighboring countries, and notably to Zaire. The history of the region changed in the 1970s. At the end of the Cold War, a readjustment of international policies became necessary. Kivu was an agro-pastoral region, but it became a mining area of strong strategic interest. There was a brutal acceleration in April 1994 following the shooting down of the aircraft of the Rwandan president, causing the death of the Rwandan president and the Burundian president, as is well known. There was an open war after that, and the victory of the RPF with the taking of Kigali and the border town of Kisangani, which gave rise to two unexpected situations in Zaire. First, a situation, a number of Congolese, of Rwandans who had become Congolese went back to Rwanda to occupy very high positions, and that convinced the Congolese that it was virtually impossible to integrate the Rwandese in Congo because they felt akin or kinship with the Rwandese who had remained in Rwanda. And then the refugees were replaced by new waves of refugees in the 1990s in the conditions that are well known. There was a liberation war launched by Laurent Désiré Kabila. The war went on in refugee camps. It extended to the forests in Congo, right up to Congo-Brazzaville. Laurent Désiré Kabila became the head of state on the 17th of May 1997, and the coalition fought the Congolese forces in that new cycle of wars and rebellion, reprisals, provoked a sort of, gave rise to a sort of general warfare, an African World War, as it was called. And here it is a war which gave rise to a number of crimes. Several massacres were carried out, and notably a massacre of disarmed Congolese military in Kavumu, an airborne operation to attack Kinshasa from the lower Congo by cutting off the electricity supply to Kinshasa, and also the environmental and health catastrophes such as the destruction of the fauna in the Virunga part and the attacks against women as a weapon of war. That 30-year virtual war, which affects the east of Congo for more than 20 years now, is an alibi for the plundering of natural resources. And part of the income of the plunder finances the war. It is essential for activities. And that vicious circle is based on the tradition of Congo being made responsible for all the ills of the region because of its sheer size. There are 4 alleged truths, which are the 4 truths which are in fact lies about Congo and its inhabitants. First, alleged truth: the Congo are accomplices of Hutu genocide perpetrators. That is linked to the refugees flooding into eastern Congo in 1994, with Interahamwe amongst them. But the historical episode of the management of the camps is well known. It is well known that the Congolese government at that time, under Candidat Atondo, decided on immediate repatriation of all refugees. But the UNHCR was firmly against it. And pressure was exerted on Marshal Mobutu for him not to carry out that decision, which would have stopped the hostilities spreading to Congo. It also goes without saying that there was no choice between the Hutus or the Tutsis. And after the events in Rwanda in November 1959, leading to the end of royalty in Rwanda. Rwandan Tutsis were made welcome in Congo. 50 to 60,000 settled in Congo from 1959 to 1961. In 1972, the UNHCR deemed that only 23,000 refugees were present in Congo because most of them had acquired Congolese nationality. Second alleged truth: the Congolese are racists. That is why they reject Banyamulenge, because they are Tutsis. In fact, the Banyamulenge affair served as a pretext in 1996 to the war of Rwanda in Congo. There is a confusion around that term, and it shows the powerlessness of Congo faced with a situation which had become uncontrollable, linked to Rwanda. The term Banyamulenge emerged at the beginning of the 70s. The immigrants from southern Kivu use that term to show that they have been present in Congo for a long time and to mark their difference with following waves of immigrants. Inquiries carried out by an American historian had confirmed the arrival of people from Rwanda fleeing violence in Rwanda. But right up to the 70s, as recognized by one of the main leaders of the group, Mola Winbiga, they were called, and they called themselves Banyarwanda. The option to mark their difference with other immigrants was founded, and one of the officers, Commander Masunzu, had first fought with the RPF and then the RCD Goma, and then he became opposed to Rwanda and to the presence of Rwandan forces in Congo. However, the result of that initiative to differentiate that group from other immigrants is important, because instead of naming the inhabitants of South Kivu, the term has become generalized. It applies to all Rwandans in Congo, including North Kivu. Banyamulenge is just a way of naming the Rwandans who are in Congo. And there is inevitable confusion, because the recent immigrants have never stated they were foreign, because if they are Rwandan refugees and if they try to become naturalized, it means that they come from outside and they no longer have any privileges, such as becoming politicians. And it is for political and land reasons that life in Kivu is more and more difficult. So even if it's not bad faith, that difficult, confusing and complex situation is a major challenge which can only be solved over time if the people of both countries go beyond the sentiments of violence which still reign. Third counter-truth, or alleged truth: Congo is allegedly at the origin of the reduction in the space in Rwanda. There's a myth around Great Rwanda, which gives rise to the existing violence. On the basis of the manipulation of old myths, it is alleged that there was once in the past a big Rwanda, a great Rwanda, which encompassed southern Kivu and North Kivu, and that it was then reduced by colonization. That was allegedly decided upon at the Berlin Conference, and then in 1964, which decided upon the intangible nature of the borders. So that alleged reconstitution of the past can then give rise to wishes to extend Rwanda into Congolese lands. What happened in 1996 revealed, on the basis of maps, the extent of that ambition. Pastor Mzumbu stated, I want to say to the Banyamulenge that they have to teach those who are fighting them that they should give an ultimatum against the devils who want to exterminate them in their own countries. And I want to state that before the arrival of the whites, Rwanda had been in existence for about 600 years. It went from Lake Suora, beyond the volcanoes. It also extended to the borders of Burundi, and we lived on a good footing with the Burundi. And even the Pishugi area, all the inhabitants were Rwandese. So if they are now in Zaire, they are at home in Zaire. End of quote. That speech is no longer as open, of course, but we have to clarify the extent of the Old Kingdom. Historians state exactly the opposite. When the first whites arrived, the Kingdom of Rwanda had not reached the borders that became its borders. It was only in a central region, but it was on the point of conquering the north of the country. The Kingdom of Rwanda is a much more recent creation than was thought. Its foundation harks back to the mid-17th century. As to the border between Rwanda and Congo, the situation is not ambiguous. If we come back to the map of 1985, Congo has land to recover from Rwanda, and not the opposite. Because on that initial map, if you can look at it, on that initial map, the western part of Rwanda was in fact Congolese. And it was the expedition of the German Count von Gotzen, who discovered Lake Kivu in 1884, that reopened the negotiations, which gave rise to the signing of the convention on the 11th of August 1910, giving rise to the border between Rwanda and Burundi. That convention went from Mount Sauvignon and Tanganyika, and Congo lost some of its land to Rwanda.
In the 19th century, the conquest was maybe the result of misunderstandings, errors, mistakes. Kigeri IV, he was a king between 1867 and 1895. With 8 armed forces, King Kigeri launched 13 military campaigns to expand the kingdom in Rwanda. But some of these campaigns were just considered as exploitation of ivory, and the lands were not annexed to the kingdom. These campaigns were not always successful, as in the south against Burundi or against Bushi, the Bashi land in the western part. At the end of the campaign against the Bashi, King Kigeri died whenever sailing down to Rwanda. He was unable to extend his kingdom. In 1895, 10 years after the Berlin Conference. The fourth mistake was the following. You cannot pretend that the plundering was logic, especially regarding the internal affairs of Congo. In Congo, of course, plundering, pillage is due to this type of transfer of the Rwandan war towards the lakes, and because they were defeated, those who were defeated in Congo. Well, for those who were defeated, it means, of course, they had to be covered by this Congolese exposure. First of all, the Congolese stakeholders were not able to serve the right purpose, and then they signed an agreement in Kigali, especially regarding the Congolese city, and then there was that was followed by a liberation war, and the disappearance of what Laurent Kabila was aiming at. And then, because of the agreement in South Africa, and because of this neglection of the new leadership, all these made it possible for those rebels to take action. Those pseudo-Congolese, like the SNDP, the Congress for the Defense of the Country, the M43, etc. And all this before the Islamist insurgents in Ituri that led to mass killings. Today, Congo is undergoing a very sad period, as previously with King Leopold II. But this is, of course, a major disaster. The rubber disaster was replaced with the coltan instead of rubber. It's up to the Congolese population to do something, and it is the reason why the population was subjugated to the situation because of refugees, because of mass killings, etc. and they were accused to be the perpetrators of these crimes, and then the territory was occupied, plundered by foreign armed forces. And then they had to accept the infiltration of the armed forces, and they had to accept the situation, especially facing predators. And part of the land had to be liberated for the settlement purposes. It might be a kind of explosion, deep explosion of Congo, as someone might say, and until the end. And this type of option means that, of course, we are blind, and I suppose that at the international level, this area, this useful area, of course, has always been isolated from the rest of the country because it was submitted to deep exploitation. This is not a new approach. That was the case in the 60s. That was the case in the 60s in the south of Kasai and Katanga areas. This policy, of course, has reached a limit. Why? Because the location of this useful area is moving, is changing, especially on the world market, and especially regarding Chopo and Chopa provinces in the forest, etc. And that would attract investors at the international level. Well, it's a question of geographic and political issue. And this is a state that was built up around the Congo area. And for 135 years, since the period of Leopold II, Congo, Zaire, Congo, etc., this country was managed as a single state. And it is not easy for this state to be affected. As a conclusion, I think that this type of disaster should end up, especially regarding this area. And I suppose that two items are very much important. First of all, we need to be able to readjust our gaze regarding violence in the Great Lakes, because we have to analyze the interventions that, of course, have been necessary. Congo is not on the outskirts of Rwanda, and those interventions between Rwanda and Uganda do, of course, have to be taken into account for the genocide, because these are two different stories, but that have taken place one after the other. And the victims of these strategies, of course, there are lots of victims, and I suppose that justice is necessary for all of them, regardless of the type of victims. And in order to find out a solution regarding this gruesome situation regarding Rwanda and DCR, a discussion is absolutely, a debate is absolutely necessary in order to clarify the situation. And politicians, experts should take part in this discussion, in addition to the representatives of the population. The next issue is also very much important, which is related to the first one. In order to put an end to this so-called Rwandophobia and to improve the relationships between neighboring countries, I suppose that it is essential for rulers to recognize that they were wrong in Rwanda or in Uganda. for example, regarding the humanitarian disasters, environmental disasters, etc., in addition to the plundering of natural resources. And I think that we need to be able to restore the situation. Tribunals like the International Court of Justice should deal with these issues. And an assessment of all of what has been performed by Uganda, for example, in addition to the damage to the wildlife, etc., and fauna, etc., in addition to plundering, pillage of raw materials, has led to a figure of $16 billion. $16 billion because of what happened. And we should not neglect all the obnoxious crimes, 617 crimes, and trying to proceed with an international process means that that would just represent an accumulation of the frustrations of the population, and that would not be good for all the interests at stake. Justice is absolutely important and cannot be neglected in order to restore peace in the region. In this context, I believe that we can invent a new regional approach in the Great Lakes without calling into question the existing borders. Thank you for your attention.